Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Don't know if I really need this, but I'd just like to welcome you all. Thank you for coming today. So our guests today are David Shook from the county jail, and we have a special surprise guest, Myrna Leha Frantz. So Myrna is the, you have a long list of things. So quickly, you're on the City Council of La Center.
And Law and Justice Commission.
The Law and Justice Commission, and you worked for how many years?
I always tell people I spent 30 years in jail, and they look at me and ask me if I was a murderer or something. But I did work 21 years as a corrections deputy, but I did other positions after that. I was hired to work in environmental services, which means you took inmates around to clean. So a glorified title for
Okay, so we're going to start with David, and he's going to just talk about, I'll answer all of your questions about how the jail system works. And over here on the screen, you'll have to get up and go look at it, is the county organizational chart, so you can see how the different positions work within the county. You'll have to get up there and go over and look at it. But anyway, I'll let David go ahead and get started and do his presentation and answer your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And now you're off.
Hello. Can you hear me like this?
Oh,
I'm a police officer, and by
There you go.
nature, can I stand up? Because
Yes,
that's
please.
not how I often do it. So is that all right? And then when you are going to talk, we'll switch places and
Yes.
do that? Okay.
Yes.
Sounds great.
I
So
have to stand up so people can see me.
Give her a boost. Good morning, and thank you for having me. Sorry, I will be on your camera that way. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me here. We are, goodness gracious, 3 years into a new Department of Jail Services for Clark County. So I want to give you a little bit of history first. And so Clark County is the second oldest county in the country, right? Following Washington County, which is where I worked for about 25 years of my public safety career, which is totaling about 35 at the moment. As I've worked through my careers, I've had opportunities to do pretty much anything in public safety. My last 15 years where I came from before was in jails and trainings and building training centers and all sorts of things associated to larger public safety. I retired, went and sold body cameras for a minute for law enforcement around the country. And my wife's like, "You're gone too much. Could you come home?" And I said, "Sure." And then she's like, "You should actually retire for a minute." And that was 6 months. And then she's like, "Yeah, you play golf here too much. You're out with your friends too much. You're traveling too much. I'm jealous," because she was still working. "So you should go back to work." So instead of going to Oregon, she's like, why not support our community here? And I'm like, "You're absolutely correct." So Chuck Atkins hired me as a deputy in his area, in his sheriff's department. And I worked there for a couple years. 2021, 2022, I ran for sheriff. I didn't get that position. But what I did get is familiarity and information, and people in the system, the public safety system, got to know me a little more. And they heard about my background and the things that I've done in my history. And at the time, in this state, there's 10 counties currently that have a Department of Corrections that is underneath the executive office. And again, go back to 185 plus years, a sheriff has run jails and enforcement and all the things that they do. In this state, the law allows for counties to do it differently. That doesn't happen in every state. Oregon doesn't allow that, many other states, but we also don't allow private jails and other things in this state. So anyways, during that time, they said, "Hey, we're going to make a change in our leadership of the jail, and we think you're the right person to make that change." So I'm going to share a little bit about where we were at that status when they made this change. And I think Myrna might have had experiences similar through her 20 plus years of jail working in the jail. So we had 32 vacancies. In 2022, right, COVID was 2019, 2020, all the things associated with the world shutting down. Our jail had 800 inmates at one time in it. It was built in 1984 with 300 beds. Through the years, they added a couple extra bunks and they did various things. And then, probably during your time, they had these little cots on the ground that they would add extra inmates all around the place. laying in hallways all over. It's not very secure. It's not very safe for the inmate population or the officers and staff that work there. But at the time, that's what they did. When COVID happened, and people often ask me, like, why did the crime go up in 2019 to 2023? This is what happened. At that time, when they made the decision to let out inmates in our Clark County Jail, there were 640 of them. In the state prisons, there's 20,000 beds. Clark County got down to 240-ish inmates. So who did they let out? Well, they let out all the people at the bottom who were the least dangerous to the community, and they worked their way up. And that's how they determined who should stay, who should go. In the state prison, the same thing. Worked from the bottom up. Named Gary Ridgefield, well, right? Green River Killer. I think that was the threshold they stopped at. That's the joke the state says. Yeah, we got to that mass murder and we decided we're not gonna move forward. They got down to about 12,000 inmates in the state prison. And people often wondered, why did crime go up at that time? Well, since then, things have been getting back to normal of what that looks like. In that same sense, they also said, hey, we're gonna do something different. So they hired me, and I created a leadership team, and this is what we've done since. So historically, the jail has had 50 plus applicants a year through the processes. We were just talking, because she started in 92-ish, and I started in 93 in my career, actually 87 in the military part of this career, but around the same time, I actually interviewed with her sheriff that hired her. And during that time, we had thousands of people actually that were applying normally. Well, since 2023, we changed how we're doing our hiring. And we've had 1,000 plus applicants since 2023, where 3 years, 4 years before that, it was in the 50s. So we changed how we were hiring. We personalized it. We invited people to the jail, to locations. We looked for our community members who wanted to be a part of public safety in our community. And so far in the last 3 years, we've hired 80 people. We're fully staffed first time in probably 7 or 10 years. They've only had a moment or two where they're like, hey, we got a name and a body, and then somebody would retire because they'd been there a long time. And again, we just did that. We've opened up new housing, HPOD. You probably remember it from programs and other places, managing inmates there. And it's a big dorm space, so there'd be 14 or 15 people here, and there's 4 of those types of dorms. It's called minimum security. The lower level inmates. And again, when you let them all out, there's nobody that can really go there. So again, when you have vacancies, you bring all your staff together and you're like, how can we provide security and safety for everybody? So with those 32 vacancies, what would happen, because in a jail, unlike law enforcement, when you're looking at police cars on the street, you don't know if there's 10 or 5 or 2. Again, you less see them, but again, you don't know who's working. In a jail, and I'm curious, how many posts did you have back in the 90s when you were working? Like daily posts?
Daily posts, you would have to post where you work in booking, or work upstairs as a rover, which you're walking around.
What was that total number?
I would say 4 posts a day, and mandatory overtime. You have no option. You're working 12 hours that day, you're gonna work 16 hours that day. Have enough time to get home and maybe get 4 hours of sleep and come back and do another 16-hour shift.
Yeah, so 4 posts a day-ish, right? A little bit. There was some...
A post being
A
what?
post meaning an officer standing there managing inmates, doing a function that's required. Law enforcement don't have posts. That's why I said 10, 5, 3. You don't know. They're driving around taking calls when they come in. And they get a choice on which calls they can take and when they take them. Having these posts for then 18 today on day shift, 14 on graveyard. Those are my 2 differences of shifts. And again, during her time, same thing. There would probably be a little bit of allowances on nights versus days, because daytime, that's when courts happen. You're doing a lot of medical stuff. You've got a lot of lawyers and other people coming in and getting those inmates to those things. So again, differences in volume. numbers of hundreds then, still the same hundreds now. Today we were 501. We had 501 inmates. That was probably a general number, close to, that you might have been at back in the 90s through when you retired.
It was got close to 800 sometimes.
Yeah.
and have 100 in each pod.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pod officer that's in a tower watching, and you have to be watching. So if there's a fight, you call a code, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. So some differences. Local jails. Those are people who are initially arrested and they're brought to jail and they go through the criminal justice process. Prisons are where people have been convicted, they're there from a period of time, and you know the day they get out. 10 years, this date. In local jails, you don't. They're in there for months, and when I first started as the director, we had people that had been in there 4 and 5 years. What? That's not what local jails are for. And again, COVID, attorneys, judges, courts, everybody had said, hey, we'll stay home, we'll figure it out, we'll lessen to 240, that number. But I had people in there 4 and 5 years. Now we've flushed the system. Those people are gone, they've been, in different crimes, right? So this is the example I share with everybody. If you see on the news somebody who gets hurt, murdered, killed, something like that, and somebody gets arrested, that person's going to be in our jail for 18 to 24 months, usually. During her time, she probably knew murder person. Today, there's so many of them in that high level of criminal activity, you don't know the names and the stories. Some of the employees that Myrna worked with, they're like, yeah, I knew Mr. Johnson who had killed XYZ, and they would know the stories. The volume of people and the dangerousness of our society today, it's really hard to know that. So as we continue to grow, as we continue to look, our community hasn't kept up over the last, since you started, since we've been here, since decades that you've lived here, our community hasn't kept up with that public safety need of our community. I don't know why. I've only lived here 14 years. But again, over the last 30 years, there's been 7 processes where the sheriff's office, the county said, we don't have enough jail beds. We got to do something different. We should grow our law and justice system. And it just never happened for various reasons. This state, the tax system, the revenue system I'll tell you about, it stinks, right? It's a cost recovery is what revenue means in county government here. It's we provide a service for all the cities, and it's how much does it take for Jill to come to my facility and stay, and me to be able to provide those services. Now, in the state law, we can't charge cities for all the felony people that they arrest. We currently have 93% of our population that are felons. That's all on the county's shoulders to pay for. But we only get, the county, 60% of the criminal justice funds from the state. The rest of it goes to the cities, they do the stuff with what they got. So right there's this interesting, we don't get enough from the state to take care of business. And again, when we have a high-level, dangerous population of felons, and again, it's at 92, 93, at least the last 3 years, and maybe that's been similar in your decades that you used to work there.
Yeah.
Now, Myrna's going to talk about what it takes to actually get hired as a corrections officer, because this is really critical to the 80 people that I've hired today. So if you wanted to share that real quick, that'd be amazing.
Yes, when I applied to be a corrections deputy, I was already working for Vancouver Police, and I was working in records and in evidence, and you have to have a high security clearance to do that. And so just to work in Vancouver Police, working in records and evidence, I went through a 6-month process where I had to take the civil service test, and when I walked in, there's 300 people in there taking that test. And I passed the test, and then the next thing they do is you fill out a packet. Back then it was more paperwork than on a computer. And you had to give them a list of all your family, your friends, kids you went to junior high with. They would go back and research and find out, were you ever in trouble? Did you ever smoke pot? A lot of questions, and then if you were investigated, to go back and see, are you telling the truth? And then on top of that, we had to go to Seattle to see a psychiatrist, and I had to sit and talk to a psychiatrist about how my growing up was, and I said, well, I had a pretty good mom and dad, and sounded kind of surreal. And so what happened then, after you talked to the psychiatrist, and he said, okay, she passed that test, then they give you a polygraph test. Have you ever been hooked up to a machine and you don't want to move too much, you got to keep your feet on the floor, and they're asking you questions, and they give you the questions ahead of time. So one of the questions was, they told you ahead of time, have you ever given, when you had narcotics, have you ever given narcotics to someone else that was your prescription? That's illegal. So that was one of the questions, and my first response before I was hooked up to the polygraph was I said, oh, I'd never do something like that. Once I went home and thought about it, I thought, oh, my doctor gave me some narcotics for a tooth I had pulled, and my husband, he was on his way to the dentist, and he had the prescription to get it, but instead he took one of mine, and I'm like, so then that made me nervous when I passed the polygraph, but I said, no, I never gave one to anyone. Because any nervousness, the polygraph can pick up on that. So you have to go through that, and then we had to run 1.5 miles and do so many sit-ups and that sort of thing. And then that was just to work in the police department in records. 5 years later, I applied for the county, same thing. Had to go through all of that again. And I said, gee, I haven't done any crimes since I was hired at Vancouver Police. So of course I passed all that too. And eventually they hire you and they send you to the police academy, which was up in Burien at that time. So you learn a lot about inmate manipulation and what to do in a fight. You have some training in ground grappling, and you have a baton. You carry OC spray, that's pepper spray. You carry a taser, non-lethal. You can't carry an actual loaded gun inside a jail, because for obvious reasons. So I passed through all of that and all of the training, and when I actually started working there, then I had what they called an FTO, a field training officer, and then for the next 2 or 3 months, she trained me, was right with me every minute, because how to do the different positions, how to be a pot officer, how to be a rover that goes in and checks on the inmates, what to do if the inmate has hung himself, that sort of thing. So one inmate that came in one night had murdered his girlfriend, and he got upstairs and he jumped off an upper tier, did a swan dive, and landed on his head. So those types of things can happen anytime. And so how do you deal with that? And you have to learn all these codes so you can radio a code, so you can get medical there for something like that. So it's a tremendous amount to learn, and then of course, you get evaluated every so often, just like you do any kind of a job. But I love that career. I think I learned a lot. In some ways, I learned more than I needed to know about human nature.
Myrna, show your picture. Show your picture.
Pardon?
Show your picture.
Yes. So when I was hired, I worked and was hired under Gary Lucas, Sheriff Gary Lucas, and eventually when he retired, I was under Chuck Atkins. I did work with Sheriff John Horch, but he wasn't the sheriff when I was a corrections deputy. So.
That's great.
Anything I could add to that?
No, because I'm going to ask you a question in just a second to fill in some holes, but thank you. That's a great kind of movement into the next kind of conversation, which is hiring all these folks. And again, they're finding today, the studies are showing that corrections staff are actually more affected with PTSD and other mental health things associated to working in a jail. Again, inmates go in this very dark day facility, and Sergeant just told me the other day, he's like, the interesting thing to me, and we were talking about peer stuff, right? Mm-hmm. How to support each other. And he's like, in the mornings, in the wintertime, I go in, it's dark. And when I get done 12 hours later, it's dark. Mm-hmm. And for many months, that's how it is. In the current jail, built in 1984, they built it differently. They didn't care about colors and lighting and things like that. They just cared about it was a brick, concrete, secured building. And today we know much better that there's different things for the employees as well as the inmates that hopefully keep them less acute way up here, but again, if they're having mental health issues or other things, it's more appropriate, right? But when we talk about renovations or remodel projects, we're always talking about modernizing that thinking, because again, if I was to let out all my inmates that have mental health or other issues, the system's already overwhelmed externally, right? But it would overwhelm it 3 times, right? Because there's just so much. And a lot of those folks in society come to our jail because of the mental health or drugs or things, or they're bad choices because they have some mental issue, like psychosis or a sociopath and those kinds of things. And so, again, we can't control who those are, but we had to, and she had to be prepared to handle them, manage them. We have 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, 4-on-1s. And when they get really dangerous, 4-on-1s, you're like, oh my gosh, it takes a whole team, because they're combative. They're intentionally, maybe they have prison behavior and other things. It's called institutionalization, because they have nothing to lose. And when you've already killed multiple people, who cares if you fight and injured officers and other folks that are just trying really to do their job. And our job is really to take care of them while they're in. It's to make sure they get to the process they're supposed to be at. Oftentimes you hear in the news sometimes, the jail let out so-and-so murderer or child abuser acts, right? Jail has no control on who leaves. The courts, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, they control who comes and goes. All we do is we look at that paperwork, and you know that from records as well as the other places, and it says Dave Shook's supposed to be out today at noon. And then our job is to get Dave Shook out today at noon. And you wanted to say something.
Well, I was going to add, as far as the mental strain, when you come in, and I most always work night shift, so 1800 or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., except when they force you to stay overtime. I might not get out of there until 10 in the morning. But anyway, when you go in there and you walk into booking, and they had holding cells for people, and they may be drunk or high or mentally ill, and they're back there screaming and pounding for the whole 12 hours you're there. So if you think about that level of noise and screaming, and you go check on them, there's nothing wrong. One inmate liked to take all his clothes off and smear feces all over the walls, so then the male officer, since it was a male, the male officers would go in and get him out, and then I would be one of the officers with gloves and bleach on to clean up that mess. But what I had for support, because my husband at the time didn't want to hear about it, because I could come home and start on my we call them war stories. But I had a group of friends at my church that that I could talk to them, and they would be supportive of me. So that was very helpful to me. And I actually, when I'm driving work, say, okay, Lord, help me to have a good night tonight and handle things the right way, because these inmates, even though they're mentally ill or drunk or high or being stupid, they are human beings, and we need to treat them as a human being no matter what they're doing.
So I have a question. My sister worked at the Oregon State Mental Hospital for her career, so there was a place for the mentally ill to go. What is there for mentally, because you were talking about the mentally ill, they're not necessarily, they're mentally ill, that's their underlying condition. So where do they go?
Yeah, in the state of Washington and Oregon in about the late 1990s, right, and early 2000, they closed down some of the regional psych hospitals, right? So in Oregon it was Damish, and then I believe there was one up here north a little ways for Clark County had, right? And so now we have Eastern State Washington Hospital and Western State. Those are 2 places, and there was a lawsuit recently, not recently, but many years ago, called True Blood. And basically is a lot of the mentally ill were spending too much time in the jails. So if you were arrested, kind of like you said, on a minor theft or criminal mischief or something very minor, but you're in jail months, which is way more than the sentence would actually be, that's problematic. It's problematic in our society. The system shouldn't hold people up. And again, so they've made efficiencies in that process, right? The courts are now following it more closely. The folks that are up there are being more efficient, but it's still overwhelming. The system is very full. Now they moved away the civil commitment side, and now they have a focus on the criminal culpability side, and restoration is what they call it. And what they'll do is, so for us, it takes somewhere between 4 to 7 days. If somebody's like, listen, we want to send you up to the state hospital because we're concerned about your mental illness, 4 to 6 days is usually the time it takes for the processing to happen for these folks to go up there. And then they're up there for a period of time. It could be a week, a month, 6 months. The whole process is to get them to a normalized state where they can actually help in their criminal process, right? Because that's the goal, is they're either too sick and they'll never get back to that that criminal culpability process, because that happens too, or no, we were able to resolve it and get them where they understand, because that's the goal. Being able to understand the criminal process that you're actually going through, and helping your attorneys to be able to defend you if that's the case. And so those hospitals, locally we have a couple of private mental health hospitals, one up at Legacy area, and then some of the hospitals, Peace Health and Legacy, have some mental health wards, right, where officers would take people up. And that system is really complex, because you have so many mentally ill people that are coming in from the outside world, the inside world, through the criminal justice, and it's overwhelmed. There's just not enough. And again, not enough money, not enough support, not enough places. And we have a new facility up here at Washington State University, Vancouver, and the state didn't get enough funding for the operational costs. They built it, spent hundreds of millions of dollars of our taxpayer dollars, but they didn't fund it. Or I'm sorry, they didn't fund the operational costs, and so it's a wasted resource at the moment. I know there's some local political groups and others that are like, come on state, let's figure out how to get this, because that will help with the other parts of the system. Allow the state hospital to be used for the criminal compartment, and allow this hospital and others to be used for the civil component of it, right? And so as we look at that, that is definitely a impediment of the criminal justice system here. Now, I wanted to get back a little bit more specific to this jail because, again, there's some uniqueness, right? This jail started at 300 beds. We got to 800 with Myrna and her time. We're not there anymore. We've had 491 beds, and that's where we said we're not going to put people in the hallways, dangerous. We're not going to do things for safety reasons. And we've been there 3 years. We just added 42 beds in HPOD. There's a little flyer on that. I wanted to show you some of that information, because this is some of the information when I talk to groups that they really don't understand. They understand, they're like, well, law enforcement, they bring people to your jail, right? So if you go back to page 3, which is the next one beyond this little wagon wheel thing, I wanted to show you that. This is really who uses our system, the Clark County jail system. And I'm sure when Myrna was working, there might have been similar numbers, but there's probably new different programs and different things through the courts that they do today that they might not have done in the 90s, for sure.
I was going to ask you if officers nowadays are given training on how to deal with mentally ill, which still is way out of our field, because we haven't studied psychology. The training that I remember getting where how to deal with somebody that has schizophrenia. So what they did is they had one person yelling at you in this ear and somebody at the same time yelling at you in this ear. And they said, pretend like that you're that person that's mentally ill and you're hearing voices, and the officer is saying, hands on the counter, spread your feet. And you're trying to do a pat on them, and they're like confused, like, who's telling me what? You know, that type of thing.
That was CIT training, which first came from San Jose over in Memphis. It was the Memphis model that showed up in the early 2000s, and they still do that. In fact, Clark County Jail, they created their own CIT, so crisis intervention training, mental health training, and the state came down and said, you guys did such a great job, we want to copy that, and now they give it to every basic academy student and law enforcement. So again, Clark County Jail, through the sheriff's office at the time, had done that, and what a great model. But it's a little old now, it's a little dated. There's a lot other things that are happening in the correctional system. Fentanyl, I'm sure you've heard of that, right? And all the people that you may have seen that are out there on the side of the road or passed out in their cars, and maybe you've seen those on the news. And when I was here as a sheriff's deputy for Chuck Atkins, I saw it every day. And again, it's not a criminal thing. It's not, in the state, it's not against the law to be intoxicated or passed out from drugs, but it definitely is a health issue. It's definitely all the issues that go along with that. And that drug epidemic has come to the jail. We have inmates that are able to bring in different drugs. They put them in different orifices and different places on the body. And I'm sure back in your day, you didn't have a big x-ray machine like we have today.
No, we didn't.
We have one of those big x-ray machines that you go to your hospital or the TSA and you stand there and inmates know how to mess with it, where they move a little bit or they do things because, again, they've put drugs inside their system. And that was some of the issues. In fact, in 2023, we had 17 overdoses in our jail. 17 inmates who had snuck drugs in somehow, some way. And there's organized crime that happens in our jail. Because we can't strip search everybody. We can only strip search some people. Strip searching is a very, very in your business kind of a thing, right? It's not the things the officers really wanted to do, and it's definitely the things the inmates know that that's what the officers don't want to do. And so they would play games with that. And then again, 17 overdoses. I had 5 officers who were affected by touching fentanyl, and they had to have Narcan. We actually have a Narcan machine in our public entry space in our jail. We have the highest doses walking out of our jail from people that come in to use the machine like a soda machine, and they'll take a dose with them, and for their own safety, for their family and loved ones. I have one. I bought it myself, but I have one, and I have it at my house because you never know who's coming into your house. And you would hope that people don't do that, but you just never know, because usually it's for you and your loved ones. That's who you're protecting up. You were going to raise your hand.
Well, only because
Yeah.
I'm missing the difference between H-pod and J-pod.
Yeah, so HPOD is this minimum security place that Myrna used to work in. Right, that's associated to the main jail right now, the one down by the courthouse next to the Public Safety Center. We have a jail work center. And in 1999, they built this jail work center, and they used to have up to 200 inmates there. And they would do laundry and kitchen and grass, and they would do all sorts of things around the community. Well, because we let them all out before COVID, but during COVID as well, we don't have that population anymore. We don't have those lower level folks. The other 100 inmates that were down at the jail work center were work release folks. So there was officers, deputies that would manage those folks, and they'd come and go, and they'd bring their own drugs in, and they'd throw contraband to each other, and it was just kind of really a mess. And so we don't do that anymore, and those inmates aren't around anymore. And so what we have there now is Lifeline Connections. They borrow one of the buildings, and then we use one of the buildings as our administrative training and other things. But JPOD is a new construction. It's happening right now today. It's on social media. I've spoken to council about it many times. It's a 64-bed medium security facility. Now, when they built the original jail in 1984, they built it in the wrong format. It takes lots of officers to watch these little sliced living spaces. And again, spaces built for 12 or 14 or 16 people during your day would have 24 or 34 individuals in it, with 1 or 2 toilets, 1 or 2 showers, 1 or 2 phones, right? Technology, and as humans, that's just not really appropriate. 2 toilets to fight over, 2 showers to fight over, and those showers run 24/7. There's always somebody in the showers, because that's too many people, right? And again, as rules and laws through the decades happened, you can't eat your lunch sitting on your toilet. You can't sleep next to your toilet. You can't do many things. And again, through the years of decency and other rules, right, they said, we've got to do better. And so again, it creates issues. So we have 21 living spaces throughout our jail. And for the number of inmates, we should have 7 or 8 for more effective managing of the inmate population. And you were talking about housing towers. There's 3 kinds of ways of managing inmates. There's I'm in the room with you, and that's called direct supervision. Hey, don't do this. Hey, don't do this. And you can feel it. That's what I did at Washington County where I worked previously. You actually can feel the tension and things, just like you would in a family, a friend, or whatever. And then there's indirect. And that's, I'm outside a glass window, but you and I are having more conversations than what we currently have. And what would you describe what we currently have inside the jail? What do those housing towers look like or feel like?
Yeah, it literally is like a glass tower, and the speakers seem to never work when I was there. So
Still
the
don't,
inmate is
always.
pounding and pounding on the window, trying to get your attention. Sometimes he's going like this because somebody's in an all-out knockdown fist fight right behind him. And the way the stairs come down, you can easily hide under that stairway and jump out and grab somebody and beat the tar out of him. So inmates are trying to get your attention and yelling and screaming and pounding on the glass, and you're trying to talk to them through the speaker. And I don't know if the speakers have gotten fixed since then.
A little bit.
It was pretty bad back then. So,
And that's really some of the dilemmas, right? Because it's hard to know when the fights. And as an officer, and there's usually one in there, I'm watching 100 to 120 people in all these little crooks and crevices and places throughout this facility. But as you can see, what happens with all these individuals trying to get in our jail. I have 4 rooms, and still the same 4 rooms I used to manage, where lawyers can come in and talk to 500 inmates. But it's not just the lawyers, it's the people who are coming in to check on your drug use issue and your other lawyer stuff and your other criminal justice stuff and your whatever stuff, professional visitors. I have 4 rooms. And then like you've seen in movies, that we have a visiting area where you can get on the phone and you can talk to the public on the other side or any of these other professional visitors. The first page, yes ma'am.
What about people or the inmates who are on scheduled medication?
Yeah, so we spend a lot of money. In fact, I just talked to council yesterday about needing to increase it, because we spend about $8 million a year providing medical services for our inmate population. And let me describe it. Out here, if you hurt your foot or you hurt a toe or whatever, you get to decide whether you go to the doctor or not. As soon as you get arrested, I don't have a choice on whether I provide you medical care or not. In this state, there's no caps on the tort claims, the lawsuits. And so we, because this is the kind of population we deal with, they're very litigious. They know when you miss them by a minute in their checks. They know exactly when something happens. Then all of a sudden they tell their buddies, and then 10 more, and then 100 more, and then pretty soon all of them are complaining. So the medical, we spend $8 million, and we have 1,000 hours of medical, from an ER doctor who's there 0.2% of a week, and nurses and PAs and all of the medical staff that you would need. Dentists, there's a requirement to provide dental care if you're in a jail for a certain amount of time. And those are constitutionally required, which is what, thank you for leading into this next slide. And I wanted to share with you all, because most people don't recognize that it's not a choice on what we provide to the inmate population. It's required through ADA, which is federal requirements, and they're really good in the state. The DRW, which is Disability Rights Washington, and the federal government, and coming into local jails. In this state, the majority of jails are 1970s or 1980s built. So they're all 30 to 50 years old. And that's problematic, because they were well before all the rules apply. And so we're not getting sued right now by the federal government because they've heard we're looking at a remodel project. Because we don't have rooms that have 36 inches to get into spaces and all the different medical things that are required, because there is no different in the federal government size on being outside and having those rights and being on the inside and having those rights. And we as the community pay for that to make sure that we have the right stuff. But I wanted to share this with you. Now, I'm not going to go through it line by line, but you can see things that you have the rights for on the outside world, you have the rights for on the inside. To vote, to call people, to talk to lawyers, to talk to your priest, talk to First Amendment, Second Amendment, well, not Second Amendment gun stuff, but all the rest of them, right? Take that one out of there, right?
Yeah.
We don't take guns in the jail either.
No.
Sometimes the inmates really try to. But again, this sometimes, and again, I don't think of it as a hampering, because I think this is what also says we're not going to have 10 extra people laying in a bunk space meant for 3. It's just how we should really do business as humans. I want people in and out of there. And if you are not guilty and you have been found not guilty and whatever, and today at noon you're supposed to get out, I don't want you there one more second, because it's just that horrible. Yes, ma'am.
So I haven't been in the jail, but I've heard it's pretty nasty. Is it possible to remodel that to get it up to some
Yeah.
decent code?
So we're currently working on that, and I'll
Okay.
share a few things. So first of all, because it's all walled in the concrete walls, back in probably your day, they painted it. And they painted it with the wrong paint. And so what happens is inmates are very smart in this way, where because the original base coat was wrong, every other layer of paint they throw on top of it, what do you think inmates would do with it?
peels off. and
peels
eat it?
off, and they make them into little hard things. Sometimes they're knives, sometimes they're other just weapons they use for things. And so they've sandblasted, I think, over the decades. They've repainted it multiple times. They've brought in experts. They've spent thousands of dollars trying, and it's always ended up. And so now we just make sure the walls are getting scrubbed by the inmates who might be in those living spaces. And we're having conversations about a remodel project. And so again, some of those things are critically important. I wanted to talk about the here and now, and you had some really good questions, and I just wanted to share some of those. So today we average about 480 inmates. That's what we did in 2025. About 92% of them are there until the courts, until the processes work for them. So it's pre-trial is what that's called. And those other 8%, so today I have about 30 inmates that have a date. They're there for 30 days. They're there, I think the one this morning I looked at just to make sure I had, their date of getting out is July, right? So not a long term. And when you look back to that page of all the people wanting to use the jail, probation violations, some of the courts and special needs things, we don't have space for them to come in and do all that. Because we have all these active criminals who've been arrested who are now sitting in our jail. So again, when we talk about more beds and more bed spaces and what we can do with it, first of all, again, we don't need 1 million beds, but we need a few more beds, and that's what we've been talking about. So when you look at this one page here, sir, and I knew you were looking at it, H-Pod, J-Pod is a brand new construction. It's happening down at our work center. It's a medium security facility, and it's just like another housing space, just like that we've managed inside of the main jail. It's just gonna be on our jail work center. And it was the easiest, fastest way to add beds to our community. I spent about $300,000 on Skamania to house 15 inmates a day for as long as we need it because locally the law enforcement can't bring people to our jail. Many of them are booked and released because there's a certain layering in our jail. When I first started, we focused locally on the inmate population. We stopped taking statewide and interstate inmates. Used to have an average of 60 a day that would be booked, right? 60 people coming through this process. That happened all the way up through early 2000s, middle 2000s, when there was 800 inmates in that jail, because a chain would come through the state. And they would stop off in Clark County because you're just before Oregon and you go this way to Idaho. We were a hub, they called it. And so for about $150,000 a year, Clark County would spend on people that had no connectivity to this community. And we stopped it. We stopped it because I wanted to focus on our law enforcement and sheriff's office here to allow them to bring in the livability issues and the people that they needed to arrest in our community. It was a temporary stop. At some point, hopefully, we're going to have more bed space and a better system working for us so that maybe we can bring some of those folks out. Yes, sir.
Question in regards to J-Pod, is the operations and the additional personnel, is that already funded?
Yeah. Yeah, so back in her day, they had those staff that were down there at this work center. And we had those. But again, in those 32 vacancies, they just took them and then they closed those spaces down. So we have the positions and bodies. Of those 80 hirings, I have those positions today that are going through training. We have 20 of them right now that are in some phase of their training. So that when in January, it's our target date to open up this J-Pod, we already have staff to do it. So we have the right staff. And in 2008 and 9, when the economic downturn happened, the jail lost 8 line staff employees. So that was her type of position. It was the inmate management folks that were basically like, sorry, we don't need 8 of you. But they didn't stop the DOC contract where the DOC probationers came, right? You remember those days?
Yes.
Right? Because they would bring the drugs and they would bring the contraband and they would do all sorts of things because they would only be there 3 to 5 days. Hey, you're in trouble, sir. Go to the Clark County Jail for 3 days. Ooh, it's your turn, Jill. Hey, by the way, would you take some cigarettes and would you take some drugs and would you take coffee because they don't like the coffee they get there? Oh my gosh, you would be so amazed and surprised at the, I don't know, smarts that they use on being criminals, but staying out of the jail, right? Go ahead, please share.
One of the work release inmates that had come out of prison, he'd done his prison time, and so he was going to do a couple of months out of work release, and he had to get a job. There was officers that would go around and check to make sure he was at work that day. I happened to be one of the officers that actually would take him to work. So all the way, all the way to, took him all the way out to where Beaches is, if you know where that is, on the waterfront, and dropped him off there at a bus stop. And this one particular day, he said to me, you ran a red light back there. And I said, no, I didn't. At 4 in the morning, the light is flashing then. And he said, no, you ran a red light. So that day when I got back from taking the inmate in, I went to my sergeant and I went to the day shift commander, because I was trained, if you even think you did something wrong, just throw yourself on your sword, admit it, you'll be fine, So I went to the sergeant and I said, I may have run a red light. I don't think I did. I think the inmate's messing with me. So he's like, okay. So the next morning when I go to take that inmate, drive him way out there to Beaches, he looked at me and he said, you ran a red light yesterday. And I said, well, guess what? I told my sergeant and my commander that I ran a red light. And he's like, ugh! He was furious. He said, you weren't supposed to tell them. That was supposed to be our little secret. And I said, I don't have secrets with inmates. So I did talk to one of the Department of Corrections people that we had out there at the jail work center and told her what he did. And she sent him back to prison. She said he was setting you up that maybe you'd be scared and bring him drugs in, but you foiled his plan by calling him out on it.
Yeah, it's called downing a duck. That's exactly what they do in prison and local jails. They learn about you, and then they figure out a way to manipulate you so that you're bringing drugs and phones and other things into the facility, and that's a felony crime for all officers and inmates that do that. And so I went into, hold on one second, and then I'm going to get to about 3 minutes more, and then I think questions.
Well, I do have
Yes.
something very
Nope.
important to bring up.
Go ahead and do it right now.
Okay. I was asked by one of our legislative assistants, she texted me a couple weeks ago, and wondered if I would come and give a talk before a committee in the legislature, because they're talking about passing a law where a female officer has to strip search a male transgender. And this, about 5 years ago, when I was still working at the jail, but in environmental services, one of my former sergeants came to me and he said, well, we're going to have an inmate that's coming in from McNeil Island that's a murderer, rapist. He's done his time in McNeil, but he has to come back here to go to court to see if he's fit to be back out in society. But he's now saying that he's transgender, and what if I came to you and ordered you to go strip searching? Because when you strip search, you're in that room alone with them. You cannot have somebody there, another officer there with you. And so you would have to go in and go through the strip search process and do that by yourself with someone that would possibly, in this case, was a murderer or rapist. So I said, yes, I'm more than willing to speak on that, because obviously I could be easily overtaken.
Yeah,
So this is really something serious to think about.
yeah.
Absolutely, and definitely this is a much larger issue. 2 more things I just wanted to point out to you, and then maybe some questions for us in just that. The dynamics in this profession, and oftentimes is not, because it's confidential. Most of the stuff corrections do is confidential. And so, but you hear from the law enforcement, right? Many chiefs and sheriffs, they have PR departments and other groups. You see media stuff. We've recently just done that. In fact, we had a video the other day that had 10 million views. It was a Valentine's Day thing, and it was like, come on, tell on your friends and family that have warrants. And sure enough, there were a lot of people that got turned in that day. But what I wanted to show you were the things that we're currently working on. And the reason that we're working on them is because historically, Myrna and corrections and that side of the world has never really been prioritized in wellness, training, all those things that make them stellar professionals. And they just had to do it because of their own gumption. And so we're working on elevating that, because corrections is a critically important field, just as dangerous, just as mentally impactful for lives spending 22, right? You work 22 to 30 years, right? Because in corrections, you actually can't retire. In one system, unless you're 65, and the other system when you're 60. In law enforcement, it's 53, right? In Oregon, it's 25 years of experience. Again, you can retire at any time. And so the unfairness of that a little bit for corrections is I have staff who are 63 and 4 and 5 years old that are walking around managing 18 to 20-year-old murderers that are extremely dangerous. And again, think about when you were maybe 60, and some of you when you get to be 60, right? Is, wow.
I was 68 when I was,
68.
before my
Oh my
68th
goodness.
birthday.
And again, it's because you're penalized if you leave early. You're penalized if things happen, right? And that shouldn't be that way for these incredibly brave folks. And so, again, as you look at the things that we're currently working on trying to improve, and then, again, the remodel, you asked about it, Jill. We've been to council many times to talk about remodeling and what we need in this community. 7 times, we're the 8th time to do this. And again, we finally had an opportunity to get into council to talk to them. And they said, yes, please get to our community and talk to them. So this is really a great opportunity because for the next year, I'm going to be doing this a lot, talking to community members to describe what we're missing in our community. Because when you see those 491 beds and all the other things, our system hasn't worked that way. And I'll tell you, it's expensive, but we're trying to make it a multi-generational, not on our backs alone, but it's a part of the system because you could hire 1 million more police officers. If there's nowhere for them to take the people you hire, the system doesn't work how it is, but it's really balanced because the prosecutors and the courts need to be working tandem. Some of the things that I've heard since I've been here is we've never been included in these conversations before. Thank you. Hey, gosh, we could work on this problem as a system versus you alone taking it on. Because that's what this system requires. It's too large. The sheriff's office is the most funded program in the county in that org chart. The jail is second. Courts, prosecutors, 73 to 5% of the large millions of dollars budget. Because it's huge. It's impactful. And again, law enforcement is different. Jail is much, you have to have so many people. So my annual budget is about $43 million. About 52 to 5% of that, depending on the year, is in people and personnel. As you look at the budget, insurance for all those employees, that keeps going up every year. I have those numbers. I'll share them with you just real quickly so you'll be aware. So again, about 52% is personnel costs. That's including the insurance. 9.9 million this year is for medical care and other services that were required by the law to provide inmate populations. So again, that's about 23%. The overtime, in 23 when I took over, the overtime just in the jail was 3.3 million. We've hired all these staff and we've cut that in half. So again, every aspect of the jail we're going into, flipping it up inside out and looking at it and trying to create efficiencies in the system itself. Again, don't know what happened before 2023, but we're looking at it differently so that, again, if I can buy a least expensive widget, we're gonna do it. And because again, I need to pay for training and I need to make sure our staff and I need to get different things to make efficiencies through the system. So we're cutting some of the costs. Currently, we have 158 officers, so line staff officers, they do the bulk of that work, managing inmates and booking and housing and classifications and all sorts of specialized jobs. I have about 20 supervisors, sergeants who are directing efforts to happen. I have about 17 administrative staff, so that's people like me and other program managers who are doing things associated. And then I have about 47 support staff members, so those that are maybe doing data entry kinds of efforts. I have a whole jail kitchen because, again, I don't have the inmate population. And we used to be able to say, hey, I don't need 12 of you because I just need 3 of you and I have a dozen inmates. So we could share in some cost savings that way. Our kitchen, and probably when you were there, 100 meals a year. I'm sorry, 1 million.
Yes.
Yeah, 1 million meals a year, feeding 800 inmates 3 times a day, plus juvenile, plus, right? 1 million. Just think, that's a huge industrial kitchen we have, and it's well used. Every time we look at this, and again, org chart-wise in the county, like I talked about the sheriff, and it's okay, there's up there, she can redo it for you. All through the state, sheriffs and the rest of those elected officials are critically important for what they do. Some counties, some executives have said, hey, we want to focus on this. Sheriff Horch and I get along great. We work together collaboratively. We deal with issues together, And we're growing Clark County Public Safety in ways to support our continued effort in Clark County Public Safety. And so what I would tell you is that when he has something, he comes to me. When I have something, I go to him. And the sense is he can focus, though, on law enforcement out here. It allows me to focus on the things inside the jail, which are totally different. And it's really hard for that executive, and just from experience, whether it was Gary or Chuck or previous sheriffs, and I know Gary was there 20-some years.
Yes.
It's really hard to be a face in all those spaces. And you probably only occasionally saw Gary and Chuck in the jail doing stuff. I'm in the jail every week. That's my place. That's where I'm focused on. I'm talking to employees every day. How's it going? How can we fix it? What's broke? How can we do something different? And that's a little bit of the difference. And that's some of the positive. I have a guy who's been there 44 years, and he's like, I never wanted to work for the executive office, but I've never been treated better. And he's just one example of the things, because now we can focus on what we're doing there. So I wanted to shut up because I could talk all day about this stuff and ask some questions from you all, because you're really the important person. And so you had a question.
Well, you have answered
okay.
part of my question, because my question is, how do you retain your employees? And the longevity is what's about
Yeah,
the number of years?
it's a marathon. You went through a 22-plus year
Myrna,
marathon?
Myrna.
Yes, and I think keeping officers moral, they need moral support, and know that, and I had good sergeants, I knew they cared, you know, and I had good commanders. I still see them on the street and we give each other a hug, you know. It was like family. In fact, I had Dave give me a tour through the jail because I wanted to see what it looked like now, because I know we've needed a new jail for 35 years. So he gave me a tour, and I said, wow, you really are keeping this clean for a jail, cleaner than I've seen it in the past, so thank you, Dave. But, you know, there's still more work to be done. We need more beds, we need a bigger jail, and
How do they keep their own mental health?
I'm sorry, what?
How do they get
So the
their-
officers, right, is your
Yeah,
question?
I mean, that's a disaster
Yeah.
for family life.
It really is.
It's a disaster to hear this pounding on, and you only get 4 hours off, and you come back and you go pound again.
On the days that we had mandatory overtime, yes, that was often true. I just really had to rely on my spiritual faith. And even when I lived in Seattle, long before I was even thought about being a corrections deputy, I had a group of girlfriends at my church that would go to the women's prison that's near Seattle. Purdy was called back then. It maybe has a different name
Still the
now.
same.
And we would go in and just go in and talk to these female inmates and ask them, you know, how are you doing? What, you know, and try to, you wouldn't really be friends with them. And if they ask you to bring something in, of course, you would never do that. But I had a heart for inmates when I still lived in Seattle and was in my 30s and had 4 little kids at home. So when I had this opportunity to be a corrections deputy, it's different than just coming in as a visitor, because I still had to do my job and I still had to make the inmate follow policy and procedure. But if you do it in a way, if you're firm, fair, and consistent, you usually don't get inmates mad at you because they see you're treating everybody the same.
Okay.
And so,
We have a question.
Yeah, hi, Bill Peterson. Are you currently able to accept prisoners from all of our local law enforcement?
Yeah, everybody can bring in. There's a booking criteria that happens. Washougal, Camas, and some battleground, they actually will take their inmates, the ones that get prosecuted and convicted. Sometimes they'll take them to Skamania, and sometimes Skamania County, because they only charge $70 a day. For our jail, when I first started 3 years ago, we were at 157, and then it was 190, and this year it's 224, and those are cost recoveries, not revenue. But the county uses, like when you left, you were terminated, right? It's a term, right? So that's not what she did. She retired, right? And you're like, oh my God, that's horrible. And so revenue is the same thing. It's a budgeting term, but it's really cost recoveries, because the county pays for it up front, and they're expecting those cities to be reimbursing the services that they're using. So it's a huge auditor thing that they help us to make sure that we're recovering all the costs. But every agency here has that opportunity. Now, do they get to bring everybody there and they're going to stay instantly? No, because again, we're full. And so they let out some of those lower level criminals, now not all of them, because some of them will stay. And there are some that are required to stay there, like domestic violence or other, that even are the lower crimes, but they're more dangerous in nature. And so we have a criteria that they look through. We changed it though to be a green, yellow, red, just like the stop signs on the streets, to make it pretty simple for cops, because when I started here, there was like 12 versions, and you're like, what's the difference between 1 and 12? I don't know. And so we made it simpler. But yes, we allow those folks to come.
Vancouver Police Department has holding cells and they can't use them.
Yeah.
By
Yes.
state law, apparently.
Well, there's rules about temporary holding cells and other ways of doing that. And if you don't have full-time staff there, and so it's by hours, right? If I have a temporary cell, it could be up to 4 hours. If it was a cell and I have actually staff there, it sometimes is up to 96 hours, and it just depends on the infrastructure. It's very expensive to have inmates or hold custodies because there's the rules on medical and the laws that go along with that. So yeah, it's definitely that true. Yes.
Okay, so our hour is up, but I am so
sorry.
That's okay,
Yep.
we got 2 more questions, so please,
Yep.
let's take the time to get
I'm
these.
good as long as
So
you
I
are.
so I have one here and one there, and
Yeah,
that will be our
the
last.
federal prison, their mandatory retirement age for correction officers is 57.
Yeah.
Yeah, and is that a big impact for your operation?
No, because this is Washington State, right? So they have their own laws on when you can retire because of the retirement system that they have. And there's PSERS, PERS 1, PERS 2, others, and PERS 2, right? So there's various varieties of them. And you're right, feds have different rules. The states here, they're 60 is where most of them are going now, but there is a group that's 65.
It's not where you have a whole lot of your corrections officers about to retire.
Actually, I have quite a bit. I think I keep getting reminded 24 could retire next year together. And again, independent, right? Your life circumstances might be different than this young lady's over here, and so they don't always come in like that. Again, it just really depends. I have a Julie Body, she's our most senior person, and I'm not ready, and she's ready to go a couple more years. So it really depends. So again, we're practicing and preparing for that, but not. So yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, David, a democracy is, by definition, not efficient. We have all these jurisdictions locally right toward us. You mentioned the cities that, and you diagrammed it here, that bring arrested people to you. In Portland, you got Gresham and Milwaukee and Oregon City and Hillsborough and Troutdale. All of those are as big as Vancouver almost, each one of those. I worked for Multnomah County for 32 years.
Sure.
Or almost that.
In corrections?
No, law enforcement.
Oh, okay.
And
Very
also,
cool.
5 years with the Attorney General's office.
Oh, very cool.
also. But that was state, of course. But Multnomah County is, if many of you might not realize, it's kind of a sliver of land. It's the smallest county among Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah is the smallest. Clark County is more like Clackamas and Washington County. But when I was working for the sheriff's office, there was a recognition by local government that there was a need for a metropolitan approach. And there was a few things that they did, and I got involved in one. It was solid waste. If we could all get together as a tri-county area, we could handle some of these problems more efficiently. Anyway, and that's my question to you. Multnomah County is economically having problems just because it's older. Downtown Portland is older and older. As the problems grow, people move to the outskirts. And my question to you is, I assume it's complicated and it hasn't even been addressed for corrections, but wouldn't it make sense to have a metro Clark County, Clackamas County, Washington County, and Multnomah County approach to corrections? Multnomah County just built a jail, you probably know the name of it, I can't forget the name.
Wapato.
Okay, huh?
Wapato.
Yeah, Wapato, right across the river, here, it's just on the east side, 122nd.
12, 15 years ago, but yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, they built the jail and it sat there empty for a while, they couldn't, now, how much money went into building a secure facility, all the electronics, all the, whatever, and then they couldn't fund it, so they sold the doggone property and buildings. I mean, talk about a waste of taxpayers' money. It should have been a metro approach, because all those people don't care where the border of a county or a city is. What I'm just asking you to do, it may be way beyond your pay grade, but to keep that in mind, that solving some of these problems might be more efficiently done on the metro. Who can organize something, what a can of worms that would be politically, I understand, but it seems to me that might be an approach.
Thank you for that. I was at Washington County when we were having that same conversation about localized policing in a metro kind of a setting, Las Vegas or whatever, right? They could never get over the hump of control. Who was in control?
Yeah,
Where'd the funds go? Where'd the funds happen?
Politics.
Whether it was a big regional training center, whether it was a regional police agency, whether it was regional corrections. We have this big river here. Oregon law, Washington law are very different in many things, and that would be the first. One of the things, and I haven't broached this much, is that we're the largest, and we have a regional training center. When I asked the other 4 or 5 counties that are putting people into that to come support that, they're like, I don't really have anybody. Well, your people come and train there, come down and help. It's the one that the police go to here as well. It's our Southwest Regional Training Center. I can't get people to come, and so the state pays my staff to go do that. And I have new people in their positions, but it's the same thing as they all want, and then when you ask them for the, hey, would you mind paying for it, they're like, it's not really that. And so to me, we're going to work on these building blocks of our current jail system and the law enforcement system here, law and justice that we talk to. We're changing our formats, but efficiencies in that system. Everybody's siloed. Nobody wants to work together to solve problems in this county. Has been my last 12 years of experience, right? The last 4 or 5 that I've been in the county actually working, but everybody wants to do a great job, but they want to do it separately. We could have savings and efficiencies, as you're talking about, if these groups would actually work more efficiently together. I'm just the jail, that's what I say, but I reach out to everybody and I say, come be a part of this conversation, because it takes us all. And so we're fixing our gaps, our areas that we know we have missing spaces, but again, working together is really what's going to solve this law and justice large issue for this community in Southwest Washington. So
Good. Well,
I appreciate your point, though.
yeah, I have to go ahead and
No.
turn off the video now, but the conversation can continue. But I want to thank you, David and Myrna, for joining us today and sharing with us. So let's give them a hand.